Hey everyone, my name is Eric Bond. I'm one of the co-founders here at Hustle Fund, and welcome to today's session, which is called Best Practices to Raise Remote. So the world is recovering, but there are some things I'm hoping do not come back from the pre-COVID days. One thing is that I'm looking forward to is never touching another human being ever again. I would love to get into a mode where we're just bowing to each other. Handshaking is a barbaric practice, and I hope that doesn't come back. Although I think I'm starting to see more hands getting extended my way, so I'm not as hopeful. But the other thing that I hope remains the same during COVID through this new phase that we're entering is that much of our fundraising can be done over Zoom forever. Now, I do think that some in-person meetings are going to be needed, especially if you're raising huge sums of money and need to get to the final close. But maybe, just maybe, we can keep our first meetings, the first meetings, at least on Zoom, which is freaking great because who wants to spend the whole day on Sandhill Road waiting for your turn to enter the conference room when you can just turn on your camera in your garage and begin to pitch? So today what we're going to do is talk about best practices for optimizing your own remote pitch. We held a similar session a few months ago, but we're bringing this back by popular demand in partnership with our amazing partners at Singapore Global Network. More on that in a second. Let's go ahead and take a look at the agenda. So pretty simple stuff. I'm going to quickly introduce myself. We're going to get right into the content about best practices for your remote pitch. We have a little bit of bonus material as well about talking about the fundraise strategy itself. That's kind of more meta to just pitching in general. And then finally, we're going to leave plenty of time for questions at the very end. And in order to do that, we are asking that you please put your questions in the Q&A box of this Zoom panel, not the chat. Feel free to use the chat, though, to introduce yourself, say where you are in the world, make fun of me, talk about my new hammock and my collection of garbage trucks as well behind me. All that's really good stuff. When we get to that moderated Q&A portion at the very end, though, we're going to be bringing my colleague Chen Wei, old friend of mine, part of the Singapore Global Network, actually the person that is responsible for allowing the session to happen today. She'll be coming on and helping me to moderate some of those questions. So that is the session that we're going to have in the next few moments. Let's keep this fun and entertaining and answer your questions too. So what I wanted to do first was actually give a shout out to the Singapore Global Network, which is allowing us to put this session together on remote fundraising. They're an awesome team. We work with them quite a bit at Hustle Fund. I wanted to give you a sense of what they're all about. So the Singapore Global Network aims to build a strong and diverse network linking together overseas Singaporeans, families and fans of our little red dot, that's kind of the way that they describe Singapore, through shared passions in business, culture, and national development. As part of the Singapore Economic Development Board, we are growing a network of global connections to welcome people and businesses to collaborate with Singapore. If you want to learn more about relocating to Singapore or the opportunities available, you can reach out to Chen Wei from the Singapore Global Network in New York to be connected with the right people or resources to get started. And to share a little bit of her contact information, you may need to screenshot this. It's a bit of a long email, but this is Chen Wei's email at the very top. And I want to also tell you a little bit about TechPass as part of this. So this is a crazy awesome program that frankly my family is considering as well. Singapore's TechPass is a visa program that allows established leaders, entrepreneurs, or tech experts to move to Singapore easily with their families. It's a really, really flexible work visa where you can do many things, but there are only 500 available. So definitely take a look at this website. If you think that you may want to try a sojourn in Singapore, it's an amazing city. The government's incredible. The people are incredible. The food is incredible as well. Everything's incredible there. I like to go out there at least 2 times per year. So that's the Singapore Tech Pass. Okay. So let's go into introductions. This is me. I raised a lot of money in my career. And let's talk about the current state of VC fundraising. So I made this slide, frankly, a couple months ago when we're deeper into the pandemic, but it's all about Zoom, right? I mean, everyone's on the platform all day long. I have probably 10 Zoom meetings all day long talking to founders. And it's working, frankly. So some of the norms around like we have to do all meetings in person, I need to like have a long dinner with you and all that stuff. Some of these old norms of the past economy pre-COVID have essentially been shedded into this new norm, which is it's totally cool to jump onto the Zoom, learn about the opportunities and transact in this manner. And I do think that this is going to persist long after COVID has expired. So let's talk about delivering an awesome Zoom pitch. We're going to just get right into it. So what I like to do is I'm actually going to stop sharing for a second. I wonder if I can do that. Stop sharing. Oh, there it is. And I'm going to give you a little tour of my garage, okay, just to give you a sense of the setup. I'll come back to the slides and we're going to talk through each of those components because we're going to start with the mechanics of what your Zoom pitch setup should look like. And then we'll talk a little bit more about the strategy behind it. All right, so here we go. Welcome to my garage. This is actually not a Zoom background. This is my life in the San Francisco Bay Area. So let me show you how I set this all up. All right, here we go, moving the camera. You can see like I have a very interesting kind of setup here. And I'm actually standing, by the way, yes, I'm wearing joggers right now because, it's still pandemic. It's okay, right? It's just got to be business on top, right? This is a t-shirt. So I'm actually standing right now. I have this little wobbly chair here. I'm actually standing right now on a treadmill. I don't this is, by the way, not necessary for a Zoom pitch, but I want to show you what my screen looks like. So this is part one, right? Which is I have my slide here that I'm sharing. I have some notes here. And then you can notice the position of the Zoom right now. Like it's not full screen, it's very high up top. And the reason why I do that is because I want to have eye contact with you, and having my notes, all the stuff that's very important above the fold on my screen is really critical, right? To make it feel very natural. Now it may not look that natural to just stare right into the camera like I'm doing right now, but it feels like eye contact, right? So that's something that I hope that you all get used to, is this kind of best practice. Some other things, though, that are a little more interesting in terms of mechanics. So I have this nice lighting here. It's a cheap Alibaba light that costs like $5, right? Whatever. I have a giant clock at the very top here. I literally searched for giant clock on Amazon, and then I got the biggest one up there. The reason why I like this is it gives me a chance to kind of check the time. Sometimes like when you're in full screen mode or have to do other things, you can't see it on your computer. So making sure that you're mindful of time is very important for an effective pitch. And then last but not least is my condenser microphone here. So I got this on this nice little swivel arm. I have a spider mount, which is unnecessary, but I have a really, really nice audio setup here. This is just a AT 2020 Audio Technica condenser microphone. It's 13 years old, I think, but it works great. I think I sound awesome. All right, let me put this back, and then let's talk. Let me reshare the screen again. That gives you the little tour of the garage there. So let's go ahead and go back to the slides. All right, let's kind of review some of these things. Again, we're going to talk about mechanics and then really get into the strategy of the presentation itself. So camera position right in front of me, a little bit higher. So like, get this like cool double chin thing going on here. Like it's my best look, right? Looking up slightly higher than where I am. My Zoom video, I'm looking at myself actually right now, is oriented so it looks like I'm basically eye contacting with the camera. So that's the right kind of camera position. I have this nice little ViewSonic monitor that goes up and down like this too. So I can make sure that if I'm standing or sitting on my stool, it's always at the right level. I always like to stand though, it gives me more energy. Lighting, we kind of talked about. Anything kind of cheap is fine. People do ring lights, but I think it's unnecessary. You don't need to spend more than 10 minutes or $10 or $15 on your lighting. And then of course the sound. So the sound is actually the most important thing. Okay, so if you have bad quality camera, I'll talk about the camera for a second, or anything else. Like if you have $100 to spend $99 of it on a really, really good microphone, because bad sound is unforgivable. Bad video is sort of forgivable. All right. So I'm using a Logitech 1080p camera right now. It was relatively cheap. I think it cost me $27. I don't like to expend money in terms of cameras. I'm not like Gary Tan, who has like these beautiful bokeh effects. It feels like he's right in your living room. I think it's a little bit unnecessary in terms of dollars spent. So again, it's all about the sound. Okay, let's talk about this second area. So I think it's very important to stare at yourself when you're giving your pitch. Okay, the reason why is that it gives you a reminder to smile more. And this is actually something that is not as common as you think in terms of pitches. Like founders don't smile that much oftentimes when they're in a pitch with me. Maybe it's because they're like, oh shit, I got to deal with Eric again, right? And I've just put everyone in a bad mood. But I think it's just like, this is serious business. You're trying to transact for real money. So I can understand if it feels like a staid kind of like serious activity here, but people like other people who smile more, right? And it's a nice reminder when you're looking at yourself to just do it. So I sort of take from, I'm not an actor or anything like that, but I've read a book on acting. And what I learned about TV acting is, or movie acting is you got to make everything 10% more, right? So like smile like 10% more than you normally would. This actually looks kind of natural the way I'm smiling right now. I can tell you it feels very unnatural, but like just remind yourself that, right? When you're speaking, also modulate your voice higher and lower, right? I mean, like 10% more, 10% less. It's that kind of thing actually will feel pretty natural as well when you're coming through your Zoom meeting. So smiling begets smiling. That's sort of like the imprinting of the behavior part on that second bullet, first sub bullet. So I watch myself, but this is like the superpower with Zoom too. You can watch others as well. So I'd like to extend in a gallery view, myself in the middle. You can move around yourself on most Zoom calls and see everyone else. And this is actually the superpower that Zoom offers. That's even better than pitching in person, is you can see everyone's faces. So if you're in like an all partner meeting right now or pitching to several people at once, it's very easy to get a sense and read of the room. Right? If people if Chen Wei's just on her phone, going like this, looking really disinterested or yawning a lot, just like, oh my gosh, when is this gonna be over? Then you can, hopefully pull some maneuvers to try to redirect the conversation, snap people back to attention. So I use these clues quite a bit, and we're going to talk about face watching in a little bit later in this presentation. So now we're going to get into a little bit more of the strategy. So let's say you go through your presentation. I do think that there is a little bit of hygiene that makes Zoom fundraising very effective, which is have a template ready, pre-programmed into your superhuman email client, your Gmail, whatever you use, that provides your full deck, that provides any interesting data if you have like a data room or some forecasting model or so forth, a quick blurb about yourself. As well as a follow-up in terms of like, I'm going to reach out to you in the next 2 days to schedule our meeting. Okay. So this is something that you should have ready to fire off as soon as the meeting is over. And I have to tell you that it's really impressive when founders are super quick to respond. It tends to be a really good leading indicator for me of a team that just seems to be on top of their organization. And I can attest that other VCs are impressed as well. I kind of missed, I think, the big point in terms of the second bullet, which is avoiding a deck. So when I pitch, every time I fundraise, I never use a deck. And this goes back to watching the faces. I don't want to be distracting my listeners with a deck that only has a singular linear story that isn't mutable. I find that's actually starts where people can lose attention. They stop listening to you. They start reading things. So that's something I like to avoid. Instead, I want to deliver my pitch always just like this into the screen, pretend there are no slides running right now. And this allows me to, again, do those kinds of micro pivots. So let's talk about this. So if I notice that Chen Wei is like starting to nod her head when I talk about like, and this is why Hustle Fund wants to invest much more into Singapore, and I'm starting to see these cues. People have very terrible poker faces, by the way. And I'm seeing that, then I can start to like dig in a little bit more deeply. Maybe I'll tell a story about a founder I recently invested in Singapore, right? Or like what I love about, going there every October for F1 and like how excited I am to see Max Verstappen overtake Lewis Hamilton, hopefully, and the Singapore F1 on October 3rd. It's going to be crazy if she's an F1 fan, whatever. Or like if I start to see her, just her eyes glazing over as I was talking about F1, maybe I got to talk about something else. to snap the attention back. Again, it's way easier to do this when you don't have slides in front of you. Okay, so jumping back, so have all those materials ready to share after your presentation so people have it as a reference that's shareable within their team and so forth. And I really like when founders do this. And I highly suggest that you get into this practice, even though it feels really awkward. In the meeting, pull up your calendar and schedule the next call. Okay. So I think that, you got to be responsible for driving the momentum of your fundraise process. And the best way to do that is to own the schedule. Don't like have jerk VC Eric say like, yeah, we'll let you know what we think. All right. It's not good enough. It's like, no, like I'm moving a pretty fast process here. And I really think we should get in the calendar next 2 days. How does Wednesday look for you? All right. Try to do that as best as possible. If you run out of time and you can't do it, then in the follow-up email that you're going to send after your pitch, make sure that you make it clear that I am going to follow up with you in 2 days to schedule. Right? If I don't hear back from you, but I think we should meet on Wednesday. You got to go very, very aggressive on that scheduling. And this is, I think, one of the top mistakes that founders are making in their pitch. Okay. So, or I guess in their pitch process. So we talked about equipment, some of the mechanics. We talked about like, I guess my thesis of just like, avoid a deck, look at yourself, smile, micro pivot your story around as you see people's attention waver. And then the hygiene of following up. Fundraising, by the way, is not so much about the pitching oftentimes, but around the organization of your fundraise process. If you can just put in a lot of throughput, talk to a lot of investors, you will get those who bite, and then you can move on with your process. Okay. So I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions around fundraising, pitching coming up later on, but I want to talk about the fundraising schedule and some of the assets that you're going to need to prepare to run a successful process online for your next fundraise. So let's talk about this 2-week process for running your fundraise. I'm a big believer that a good fundraising process should not be done ad hoc. Like, like random investor Chunwei just reached out to me. Sure, I should just take that meeting. Like 10 days later, Eric is reaching out to me. Sure, I'll take that meeting. That's a terrible way of running your fundraise process. It's totally non-competitive. You want to create lots and lots of FOMO where it's an auction, where it's just like, I got to work with founder Jane, she's incredible, but I'm feeling that there's deal heat behind it. This is actually what we want to drive. And I'm a big believer that it should be done in a tight timeline, 2 weeks. So this is how we're going to do it. So a few days before the 2 weeks starts. So it's not quite 2 weeks. It's maybe like 17 days, right? The Thursday before, at this time, you have a big list of investor targets full of VC funds, angels, anyone that you think would want to give you some money. And you have figured out like who can give you the warm introductions, right? Maybe it's other founder friends. It could be existing investors, your mom and dad. It doesn't matter. Ideally, you want to get warm introductions from someone within your network who can serve it if possible. If you have to go cold, it's fine. But, do your best to see whether there's any warm connections there. So all that's lined up. And what you're going to do is have your network blast off all the introductions on a Thursday night. So what's going to happen is on Friday, these VCs are going to wake up, see that, oh my gosh, like Jane is raising, this looks like a cool company. The call to action that you want is like, they're coming back to refer or going back to you as the founder and saying like, yeah, let's set up some time. Okay. So that's going to happen on Friday and Saturday. And you're going to be just straight up ghosting everyone. You're not going to respond, or you're not going to respond to a damn person. Okay. And the reason why is coming up soon. So all these introductions are coming in, let's say you blast off to like 70 people for warm introductions. And let's say like 30 or 40 people come back saying like, I'm down to chat. Ghost. Nothing. Okay. So the reason why is, I think I talk about this in the next slide. Yeah. Okay. Here we go. Is on that Sunday is when you then begin to construct a schedule. So what you want to do is be able to see all the people who have opted into wanting to talk to you and then schedule them accordingly. And the way that you're going to just basically schedule these people is by first through the Monday through Wednesday of the first week, scheduling all the tier 2 firms. These are the people that are definitely nice to have, but maybe not the ideal investors that you want to have on your cap table, but still great. And on that Monday through Wednesday, you're going to be taking hopefully 5 to 10 meetings a day on Zoom back to back and getting your reps in, right? You're going to get your practice in so that by Wednesday through Friday of the first week, you're now scheduling your tier one VCs. This is the people like Eric Bond, right? Who are just like, it would be a dream to have him, not to inflate my ego too much. And then those folks are going to enjoy, I think, the very, very best refined pitch at that point. At that point, you've probably done hopefully a dozen or 2 dozen pitches. You've refined some of the questions and can anticipate the hard questions and know how to respond to them. So your best pitches are happening towards the middle to the end of the first week. That weekend, after your first week, you cannot do anything. Okay. You can't go on vacation, don't get married or anything like that weekend. You want to leave it open because there's going to be some VCs who are going to reach out saying like, we should grab breakfast, we should grab lunch, we should go take a nature walk, we should grab dinner, we should have drinks. That optionality, you want to leave it open. Okay. So that some of these ad hoc kind of courting things can take place, or even more meetings can take place over the weekend. Week 2, Monday through Wednesday, if you have any other remaining tier 1 or tier 2 firms to schedule, make sure that they happen at the beginning of the week. And then from Wednesday through Friday, talk to all those trash firms that you do not care about. Like you want to just like, whatever, like if they want to be competitive in process, put in a term sheet, that's great. Use them as a stalking horse, but you want to have like your worst pitches at the very end. And on that second Friday is when hopefully multiple term sheets are coming in. And the idea is that you've put in your best VC pitches with the best VCs on your list in the first week to give them enough time to put together something that could be a verbal or something that's indicates very deep interest by the end of that second week. Now, there's more processes happens after that. Like you'll probably have to take a couple more meetings and all that stuff, but you want to really tighten those first pitches in that first 2-week period because that maximizes your chance of being able to achieve an auction process. What's an auction process? More than one VC is offering a term sheet or has deep interest, and you are in control of selecting whom you want to work with on what terms. Okay, so that's the goal of this entire 2-week fundraising process. Okay, let's talk about how you go about figuring out who these investors are. So there's a lot of really great databases out there for finding angels, for finding other VCs. There's AngelList, which is like the OG of, I guess, investor lists. I really like NFX Signal. Crunchbase is pretty good. And then going straight up to LinkedIn and seeing like who seems to be rich works. In the United States, at least, we have a constraint that anyone who can be an angel investor, if you're doing a seed round, has to be an accredited investor. So that's someone with at least $1 million of net worth liquid, not including their home, or as making $200,000 a year of income, or as a couple is making $300,000 a year of income. So, angels don't necessarily have to be tech workers who are at Google in Silicon Valley. It's actually quite an expansive definition. It could be your dentist, your doctor. It could be a plumber, right? I mean, like anyone that has that can meet these requirements can potentially invest in you. So I would be pretty expansive and inclusive in terms of like whom you think you can invest in, or sorry, whom you think you should pitch. So what I do is I try to create a big spreadsheet, right? Try to aim for like 50 to 100 people they think could be potentially some people that or entities that you want to pitch. And then I go straight into LinkedIn, and this is where you have to do a little bit of brute force work. Plug in each one of these people into LinkedIn. Try to identify who within your network could serve as a warm intro, right? So LinkedIn has this nice feature where you can see secondary connections. And if you see someone that could be a good secondary connection, reach out to them, ask them whether they'd be willing to be a referrer for you. All right. So that's the work that we do as well at Hustle Fund when we do our fundraising as well, something very similar. The next thing that is so important, possibly the most important asset you're going to create for your entire fundraising process, is the blurb. Okay. The blurb is like this really, really fast summary that provides like a zeitgeist 60% view of what your company is all about that your referrer can forward along in like under 2 seconds. So if founder Chen Wei is like, Eric, I need you to introduce me to these like 11 people. I'm like, oh crap. That sounds like a lot of work. But she's like, but I've presented this amazing forwardable blurb. I'm like, okay, great. I can do that watching Netflix in like under 5 minutes, hit up all those 11 people. And if the investor or the prospect, I guess, opts in, I can easily just say like, here, meet Chen Wei. Right? Easy, no problem, right? I can do it in my joggers all day long. So let's talk about like the elements of a really good forwardable blurb. So this is an example that I just straight up made up for a SaaS platform, but it's very chill. It's like, hey, name a person who can be a referrer. Do you mind forwarding this over to, investor? That's it, right? So you have the call to action, and then I can just forward it along without any context to the person you're trying to reach. Start with a very, very fast 1 sentence, maximum 2 sentence description of what your company does. Provide the coolest, most interesting details about your company, ideally bullet form next. Doesn't have to be comprehensive. Do not be comprehensive. Okay, do not teach me about the market, whatever. Just talk about like whatever 1 to 2 things look really cool, or 3 things, right? We're making a lot of money, or we just closed all these contracts, or we just hired like Bill Gates to serve as like our CEO or something like that. I think a team flex is always important to include. So if you have like relevant skills in this market, or have had exits, or just whatever, like that's kind of nice to know like whom you're working with. And then always end your blurb. In fact, put this on all of your materials with contact information. On your deck, you should have contact information on the footer of every slide, but especially for this blurb. So included, I really like teaser decks. So if there's like a summarized 5-slide version, team, problem, solution, market, and traction of your full deck that you can include on a DocSend link, add that, and then your contact information. Talking about DocSend for a minute, like I really do think that you should not send PDFs or Google presentations directly to investors. You want to be able to stock them, right? So with DocSend, 2 things are really possible. One is you can always upload the latest version of your deck. You might find through some of your presentations that you need to adjust some slides in the story. So you can always present the latest version of your deck through a single link. That's one thing I like. The second is the stalking, right? You can see who is logging in when you put an email password behind it. Like you have to type in your email to unlock the deck. And I love these kinds of games when sometimes a VC just tries to play radio silence on you, but you're noticing they're opening your deck like 5 times a day. You basically called their bluff at that point. You know that you got them, right? Or something interesting is going on. So it's never perfect, but provides some pretty interesting clues for you as a founder as you're trying to build your auction process. Okay, so that's the elements of the forwardable blurb. We talked about a bunch of things when it comes to best practices for pitching and closing on Zoom. And I want to make sure that we have plenty of time to answer your questions. So if you, by the way, found this information to be helpful, we do these sessions on a monthly basis, actually 1 to 2 times per month, talking about all aspects of fundraising, startup growth, and so forth. You can search for us on Hustle Fund on YouTube, and you can easily find all the videos that we've created so far to date. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to stop sharing for a second and talk about any questions that you have. So Chen Wei, if you're still there, I'd love to invite you back. And it would be great to see if there are any interesting questions that popped up that we can try to address together. This is Chen Wei from Singapore Global Network, by the way.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Eric, for a super helpful workshop. I think I myself learned a lot of tips. Now I'm wondering if my frame is right and all that. We have pretty interesting questions here. Ping, Kevin, and Caleb are asking, what camera are you using? And your thoughts on how Zoom became the norm. And if you don't use Zoom, would that frustrate potential investors?
All right, let me just write this down because I don't want to miss any of these. These are great questions, so thank you so much. So I am using a Logitech HD 1080p webcam. So if I had a mirror, I would just flash it to you. Maybe I can just take a quick picture of it and just show you what it looks like. My whole strategy was just like to, basically to go on to Wirecutter, which is my favorite tech reviews site. And then this is what literally we're looking at right now. If it captures the Zoom, it's very simple. And I didn't want to spend more than like $30 on it. So something that looks pretty clear where you can see my expressions is pretty much it, right? So don't go crazy on the camera. Now, these next two questions are fascinating. So how did Zoom become the norm? And then will it be frustrating? So let's talk through that a little bit. Um, I think so it's interesting because like Zoom had like this $10 billion market cap pre-COVID, is now worth, I think, well over $100 billion, I want to say, maybe like something very crazy during COVID. But it's weird because they're not like an early like teleconferencing system. There are incumbents like WebEx, GoToMeeting well before this. So why Zoom? I think that they won purely on two things. One is it's a very, very stable video conferencing system. So a lot of other video conferencing systems work on WebRTC, which is a very common protocol that Google Meet, a lot of others use. It is good and it's getting better, but it doesn't do very good compensation on things like audio. So if you meet me on a Google Meet, sometimes my sound from my computer actually gets picked up by my microphone and it sounds echoey. It's like a little bit janky. But also they just killed it when it came to user interface. Like you don't need to have a Zoom account. You just need to download the application, click, and it just begins. Some of those simple things just really worked. So will it be frustrating if you give a non-Zoom link to a VC? This is going to be kind of embarrassing because like, who am I? Like, I'm not like the king of the world here. You don't need to cater to my desires. But that said, please stick with Zoom. Just freaking do it. Microsoft Teams is really janky. It's just like is annoying for me to like set up the web browser, and I'm having some of the same WebRTC issues. They're similar with other platforms, and it's like for like Silicon Valley VCs, we're so like conditioned towards Zoom being like the best practice. It is like a little bit of a bummer when I get a Google Meet, right? I'm just like, oh, really? You know, and again, I realize how childish and stupid that sounds because it is, but just freaking stick to Zoom, okay? Like, just like let's use the love language that VCs want. They're gonna appreciate that. All right, I ranted a little bit too much on that way.
Do you feel like every team should get a premium Zoom account, or is a 45-minute trial meeting sufficient for most meetings?
Oh, I would definitely get at least whatever cheapest paid tier allows you to have like as long a session as possible. I mean, like sometimes when you're just in the zone with like VC Shenwei, you're like, oh my gosh, we're like vibing so hard. Like if it's like the right person, sometimes you want to just go 2 hours with that person, right? And just be like, screw it, let's just do it. Like let's build this relationship. And frankly, for me also, like I have this little theory here around sunk costs, which is the more time I spend with someone I want to have a business relationship with, I think the harder it is for them to say no to you, right? Because they've already put in so much of their time. So yeah, get whatever cheap paid tier. You don't need to get the webinar tier like this one, which is a little bit more expensive unless you're doing webinars. So anyway, Zoom, that's Zoom. Yeah. Anything else you're seeing? More questions? Yeah, please.
From Manu. I often hear how you should get to know your investors ahead of time and understand if it's a good fit. How do you suggest that founders do this and build a relationship before the actual 2-week sprint of fundraising, especially if founders are sending cold emails?
Yeah. Manu, very good question. So thank you for raising that. Yeah, you're right. You know, if you have an opportunity to do a little bit of research on the investor beforehand to determine fit, that's beneficial for everyone, right? What you might find in the course of that research is that you're wasting your time talking to Eric. Like perhaps you're trying to build like a asteroid mining startup, which sounds cool, but like Hustle, there's no way in hell like Hustle Fund's going to support that because we're like all software, right? So it helps you to save a little bit of time. Let's say that you are building like a software business and you're really deeply interested in working with myself or a VC that can support that sector that you're working on. Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, like you can have a little bit more data in terms of common ground on how you can sort of build rapport very quickly. So if you know me, you know that I work in my garage. I talk about my minivan a lot. Like my entire brand is basically trying to be everyone's dad. So I'm very like avuncular, I think, in terms of personality. So, you know, good dad jokes are something that are endearing to me, right? And by the way, women out there, make really great dad jokes too. So I don't want to make this any gender conforming. You should talk to Elizabeth and Sheehan. Their mom dad jokes are ridiculous, right? I guess like the best way to do this, frankly, that I know is Twitter. So Twitter is almost like I remember in high school in English class, they're like they said like the eyes are the windows to the soul. I think that's like a Shakespearean thing. Twitter is the window to the VC soul as well, right? So and most VCs are pretty active on Twitter these days because it's turning into be a necessary part of the branding process for any fund. So if you just go through, look at like the last month of what's being tweeted, that's very helpful. Now, in terms of establishing rapport, I also do think that beginning to engage VCs through Twitter is a pretty solid strategy as well. You can't do this like within 1 week, but if you feel like you're going to be running a process over the next 2 or 3 months, starting to try to like reply to some of the tweets, retweeting, like engaging in conversation so that there's a little bit of brand familiarity of like, oh, Chen Wei, like I know your name. I've seen you on Twitter in the last 2 months. Again, it makes it a little harder for me to actually like reject the meeting because it's just like, I feel like we kind of know each other, right? That just seems rude. So that stuff really, really works well. So hopefully that this gives you some thoughts, but I do think that Twitter is like the most miraculous form right now for networking with investors, especially on the institutional end.
Nice, thank you. Another question on from Camilla in London. From an investor standpoint, how do you avoid being fooled by aesthetics? So, and then from a founder's perspective, if I'm not the most charismatic speaker on Zoom, but I'm actually really good, how do I bring across that? And what if English is not my first language?
Can you repeat the very first question around aesthetics, Chenwei?
From an investor standpoint, how do you avoid being fooled by aesthetics? High quality camera and nice smiles are great, but in the end, there may be someone who is not the most charismatic on Zoom, but still has a business worth investing in.
So this is a very fraught question, the way that I'm interpreting it. And this is actually the reason why we almost never do pitches. When Hustle Fund is listening to a founder pitch, our first preference is always to do this on audio. No Zoom, just on the telephone. So the reason why is I'm going to just like highlight things. Is like people have racial gender conditioning that make them naturally biased the moment that you turn on their audio, right? So like if I'm like really ugly or something like that, just like everything's a mess here, you know, that's unfortunately going to be like a bias right there. And I realize how like petty and like stupid that is because it is. Right. But like, and like if it gets worse in terms of gender and it gets worse when it comes to race as well. Right. Now, there's not much you can control for that because like it doesn't mean anything about your quality of being like an insanely good founder at all. But at Hustle Fund, our policy is try to do everything on audio first so we can just hear the pitch and the ideas and make our investment decision on that basis alone first. And then we can get into video and all this stuff as we're collaborating, of course. But there's that. So I just want to call this out, which is just there's a little bit of a conditioned bias when it comes to video always. So what do you do then to kind of counteract that bias? Well, we actually have a presentation on the Hustle Fund YouTube channel around putting together your pitch deck slides, titles. You can just search for Hustle Fund slide titles or something like that on YouTube. We did this actually a few weeks ago. And what we get really, really deep in terms of like slide construction and so forth. So for me, the place that I begin is like trying to understand the persona of the VC whom you're trying to pitch. And it's largely a pretty narrow trope. So imagine me, maybe like 4 inches taller. You know, I'm like 5'8" right now. On Tinder, I'm like 5'11", but like in reality, I'm like 5'8" right now, right? So white or Asian man, went to like a Stanford or Harvard, like maybe Stanford, Harvard Business School as well, worked at McKinsey, perhaps worked at like a top fund like Sequoia as a principal, and maybe it started his own, or usually his own fund after that. It's very, very indexed towards men, very, very indexed towards a very narrow group of men, who actually have a very similar kind of background here too. So what we talked about in the slide titles presentation was if you went through the analyst program of like a McKinsey or Boston Consulting Group or Bain. By the way, I was there for 3 months and then they fired me because I was so terrible. I just couldn't handle it. They train you actually on a very specific style of how you construct your materials. Like it's all about the slide headlines and all stuff. So if you put together your materials in a way that conforms to how VCs for the most part were trained in putting together slide assets and like blurb assets and so forth, then there's a little bit of that cognitive resonance of just like, oh, this person's like me. Like I can just sort of tell in the way that they're pitching, telling their story, the slide headlines. It looks very similar to like my analyst program at McKinsey. So there's these kind of small things, but like really, really understanding the persona, getting it just like a really like non-bullshit sense of like, where do I think that they're biased? And then trying to just see like when I'm pitching them, like, what kinds of things can I do to counteract that bias, right? So it's a very tricky subject that a lot of VCs don't like to talk about because we don't like to admit that there's racism and sexism in this industry, right? But that's something that is going to be true in Zoom pitching as well as in your in-person pitch as well. If you're a woman, don't like, and I'm kind of frankly speaking to like some of the experiences my wife has, who's a founder, like immediately reject anyone who's like, I'm going to meet you at the hotel lobby at 8 p.m. kind of stuff, or let's like grab drinks like late at night kind of. It's like, even if they want to give you money, why would you spend 10 years with such a creep? Right. So like, those kinds of things, like if it's too much in the extreme, then like, of course, like that should be an automatic no. There should be no price to that they can offer you. If it's more just like general racism and sexism, then like, again, like really, really try to understand a persona, really think about like, what are sort of like the counter transferences I can build into my pitch to just make it really quickly establish that I'm just like you. So I'm not sure if that really like fully addresses aesthetics, but that's actually where my head went. Let me try to talk about the charisma and then the first language part. So it really does help if you're a great storyteller, obviously, right? And that's something that will attract people. But that said, passion is something that is also a pretty great enabler too. Let's talk about like Elon Musk. I actually think he's a horrific storyteller, speaker. Like he's just straight up awkward. And part of it's not really his fault. Like he has Asperger's, so like, social interaction is just more challenging for him. But do I think he's an effective pitchman? 1,000%. Like I think he's nearly as effective as like a Steve Jobs back then. Maybe not quite, but like getting close. And the reason why is that when he's talking about his products, it's utterly clear that this is 100% what he loves and believes in, right? So what you may lack in terms of like being at ease with personally and like telling great stories, you may be able to make up with just like authentic charisma, but through just like the passion for what you're doing. And that actually is something that is very, very clear to pick up when you completely love what you do, right? What helps, I guess, from like a more like superficial level is like always try to smile more. That's another thing. But like, I think the passion is just where you can index really hard. Now, first language, English. Okay, this is another very strong bias that's a problematic in Silicon Valley right now, which is, VCs, I think where the dollars go prefer people who have English as a first language. I don't think that's necessarily right. At Hustle Fund, we have folks who definitely don't have English as a first language as well, not to show us too much. But I think the way to sort of proceed with that is to try to speak more slowly, right? Speak more slowly, speak more clearly. Try to speak maybe 10% slower than you normally would in normal conversation. And so just at least so the ideas come through, and then lots of smiling, and then make it abundantly clear how passionate you are about this project, this business that you're trying to create for the world. And I think that's the best you can do. But like, I think it's the mistake to just ignore just at the beginning of this, like that if you are not like, if you're a woman, if you're someone who's underrepresented minority, someone that has a different language, it's going to be harder. So the last sort of piece of advice I'd share there is the way to overcome that is to just have more leads. So maybe it's not going to be like 70 people you have to reach out to get this fundraise done. It might have to be 100 or 120. But if your business is starting to succeed, it's going to get easier over time because the numbers will speak for themselves, right? And I liked what that question was said. It's like, I'm good, but like I have some issues with like, rapport and charisma. The being a good operator part will shine through after your seed phase, I hope.
All right. Thank you, Eric.
Sure.
I mean, even for myself, people say I have an accent, but speaking slowly and enunciating my words have helped a lot.
Yeah, well,
Late.
Shanwei, you're great. I mean, you're very charming and you smile a lot too. So I've never seen that as a blocker in our interaction, by the way. And your English, frankly, is perfect because you grew up in Singapore, which is a fucking English speaking country. Anyway, sorry. I get really riled up about this topic because like biases are, okay, just one last thing here. So if you guys are angel investors at some point in the future, all of you, if some investors early on are going to be tripped up on something this stupid, this is just an opportunity for you to just be an ally early on, invest into these great teams when they're not really being perceived as the obvious ones. You'll make a lot of money working with those who don't look just like me or a white version of me from Stanford and so forth, right? So anyway, let's move on. I'm sure there's lots of other
Yeah.
questions. We got 15
Yes,
more minutes.
so many. Layla's asking what sexy details would you include in the intro emails for an early stage startup that doesn't have typical traction signals yet, such as large number of users or MRR?
Great question. Okay, let's go back into the slides a little bit. So, oh, look at that, Singapore Global Network. We'll come back to that a little bit later. So here are the sexy details that we talked about. So contracts, revenue, and like maybe a major pilot. So depending on what stage you're on, I'm going to say that let's pretend you're a little bit more of like a pre-seed stage. There's some things that you can sort of rely on that aren't necessarily oriented towards numbers like revenue. So it might be things like early. So I would like in the very, very early days, talk about maybe one or two key pilots. If it's like a very interesting brand, it could be like, I'm starting a pilot with Salesforce or something like that. That's great if you have it. If it's not that, then might be like, we're starting two pilots with like two mid-market companies, maybe make it a little bit more vague, that are employing like 1,000 employees each. You know, if it's not quite a logo, that actually sounds pretty impressive too, right? So if it's early pilots, that's cool. If it's early traction, let's say on a more consumer-oriented app, perhaps it's just like, you know, when we started just 3 months ago, we already have signed up like 5,000 people who've downloaded the app. And like our cost per acquisition was like $1 per user or something like that. I think that you got to kind of latch onto something to show that like there's momentum behind it. So like, what's the purpose of this? I think the purpose is to show, for me at least, is that this is a team that's pretty serious. So we get a lot of pitches for idea stage businesses that we frankly can't support. You know, and I actually have a lot of empathy, and it kind of makes me a little sad that we can't support them yet, although TBD in the future. A lot of folks are sort of like part-time on the project. Like I still have to have my day job working at Cisco or whatever great company to pay the bills, but I've got this thing on the side or I have an idea, right? But I need money in order to make the idea happen. That's like the worst position to be in because there's so many people who have great ideas, who are great at dreaming. I really like, frankly, Shenwei, if like you came to me saying like, I'm going to create the next Salesforce CRM. Yeah. I mean, that's crowded. Yeah. I mean, like, you know, I don't know if like how easy it's going to be for you to do it, but would I fund you? Probably in a heartbeat, because I've actually had a chance to work with you and I know how hard you hustle, and it's really the quality of the execution. So, you know, for me, I think what a sexy detail is interpreted as, you know, something that shows that you're serious about the idea and I've actually put words into action. Right. And it doesn't have to be this impressive, what I'm sharing on the slides, but early pilots, early traction, maybe net promoter score, or even things like customer discovery. It's like, I'm getting started right now. I've had 200 conversations with, you know, dads who want to create like this kind of like summer camp platform or something like that. You know, that is impressive. Right. So most people are hustling towards something, and there's usually a metric in there that's pretty impressive. So I hope that gives some fodder. I don't have a perfect answer for this though.
Can you repeat the 5 parts of the teaser deck? Some people are asking.
Team, problem, solution, market, traction. Let me go into each one of those. Team. Is this a team that has relevant skills and experiences for solving the problem at hand? So if Shenwei and I were like, we're going to create the next COVID vaccine, right? And then investors are like, that's awesome. What's your background? It's like, you know, we are like software people and, you know, business development people. We have no sciences background. Then the investors like, go away. You know, you're wasting my time. So like, you know, if you have like relevant backgrounds, then if there's co-founders to show that you have a track record of building things together, that's ideal, right? So that's team. Problem. It's not just a simple problem statement of like, you know, we need Uber for families. Like, I get that. I got 2 young kids. Like, these aren't my garbage trucks, right? Like, they're my little kids' garbage trucks. Like, I would love to not lug around the car seat and just take Ubers everywhere, right? But how did you arrive to that problem? I want to hear things like, we spoke to like 100 families and here's the data. And like, this is like exactly the kind of offering that we think we want to get to, which leads you to a solution. It's generally the platform or software or service that you want to provide to solve the given problem. If you have an early prototype, some early users that are using that's even better. But if you've actually built something, that's a huge signal, because now you've crossed the chasm from an idea dreamer to someone who's actually now building and executing and hustling. That's huge. So team, problem, solution, market. This one I think is the most hand wavy, and it's okay. It's just like, you just need to make the case that you're building into a really, really large market if you want to get venture capitalists to invest. At Hustle Fund, we actually have a very simple formula. At the post-money valuation that we can invest in Chunwei's business, is she working in a market, and do we think that she has the capability of 100xing? Meaning, if I invest very luckily at a $1 million valuation or whatever Chunwei wants to do next, and then she can serve a $100 million exit for us when she's done with her journey within 7 to 10 years, that's a fund returning outcome for me, meaning like all of my investors' money can be returned back to them. And now we can get into this profit sharing mode called carry, right? So it's a very high threshold. Angels, by the way, are very different. Like, if it's just my capital and like Chunwei's like, I'm going to create this business, and like she 5x's the money in like a couple of years, that's like freaking awesome. I'm like, yeah, 5x. But like for a fund, that's like, ugh, that's so little. We can talk, there's videos about that on the Hustle Fund YouTube, by the way. Team, problem, solution, market, traction. So this is also very, very hand wavy. If you've got an early pilot, some of those early users, it's great to show it. But a lot of pre-seed investors are quite forgiving if it's so early that you don't have it. So that's a great teaser deck. The way that I would do a teaser deck, by the way, is the way actually I do my decks is like, I create the full deck first. And then once it's done, I chop it down to just those 5 slides based on what the deck I've already created, and that I'm done. So it should be a really easy exercise for most of you.
Thank you, Eric. Rahul's asking, how do remote follow-up meetings work and how to best close over the whole remote process?
I missed the first part of that. How do remote what? Can you repeat that?
How do remote follow-up meetings work?
So this is where I'm like a little confused myself. So speaking for my fund, we do, since the history of Hustle Fund began, all of our investments online or on the phone. Like, we never, maybe like a dozen out of the 247 companies in our portfolio, we've met in person as part of, and like actually closed like that way. But we're not normal. So I'm not quite sure what happens after COVID. Again, like the way that we sort of framed today's presentation was in the context of first meetings. Like, how do you set up your equipment? How do you actually deliver a great initial meeting so that the outcome is not necessarily that Chunwei and Eric are ready to invest, but that they're ready to actually dig in further with you. So my guess is that I anticipate that the second meetings are probably going to be done in person the later and later we get into the year and into next year. But there's a chance actually that a lot of VCs are going to like this kind of schema that we set up and will want to continue to do this via Zoom. So it's no different than scheduling an in-person meeting. You just have to be really aggressive on the schedule. Again, it's not just like this thing where it's just like, let me know how I can help. And then like, the VC just walks away and you never hear from him or her ever again. You just have to persistently follow up. And then every 2 days, I would just be like, just checking in, like, we're moving our process as aggressively as possible. Like, we would love to get you on the books. So this is where a lot of founders often get nervous, is like, am I going to annoy the VC? So if this VC is going to ghost you, there's a lot of reasons why VCs ghost. And I actually now understand it, now being a VC myself, although I try not to. A no is not a no until they've actually said no. So there are some LPs that I have, prospects, investors in my fund, I've been pinging every month for the last 40 months. Okay, nearly 4 years, I've been pinging them every month. And the reason why is like, our policy at our fund is it's not a no until they actually told me to F off, right? So there are some that are just going to take forever, but most in your process are going to like let you know pretty quickly, right? Because like once you have term sheets and things like that and say like, do you want to participate or like consider like being a lead, like it's in their interest to actually just like let you know pretty quickly. But I would be very aggressive. Every 2 days, just reach out to them. And you can suggest options. It's like, I'd prefer Zoom. It's really easy. Or, if you're starting to see that a lot of people in San Francisco are willing to take your meeting, maybe you do schedule like a week to come out to actually do that final closing process in person, have lots of walks, lots of dinners, and so forth. One of the tricks I learned from a founder was just like, if she felt like things are moving very quickly, she would just make it up and say like, oh, I actually happen to be in San Francisco this weekend. Would you be down to speak? And then if the investor says yes, then she'd book her flight and just come out, right? So that works too.
Okay. Should we do one or two more?
I think we could probably sneak in two more, Cheng-Wei. I'll try to be quick.
What if investors prefer you use pitch decks instead of just verbal? If someone is more visual as compared to verbal?
Well, that's fine, but I think I would give people the option. I'd be like, hey, like I came prepared with a deck, but I kind of like just talking like regular people like this. Is that all right if we do this? Or if you prefer a pitch deck, let me know. Give them the option, right? But really try to do this without a deck if you can. The reason why is the power balance feels way more normal, right? Like when you're just like delivering a pitch, it just feels like, it's very easy to just sit back and listen and be like Caesar mode, like, yeah, I don't know about like as a VC. But when you're in a conversation, you're forcing them to engage, you have more power back, right? So yeah, try to give people the option, but I really, really strongly suggest verbal if you can do it.
Okay. I don't think we can answer everyone's questions today, but if I'm just going to pick one more.
Please.
How far in advance should you plan your fundraising with respect to when you need the money to come in? After these 2 weeks, assuming you get interesting term sheets, how long would it take to actually get the funds?
Yeah. So I'd say that it's going to be like another 3 weeks to 6 weeks in most cases. So so it really depends also. So if you're going to be doing a really early pre-seed or seed round where it's all done through Y Combinator safes, which is the norm, and that's how we do almost all of our deals, it's very fast. It's just like, okay, Eric, you agree. Here's like the safe, sign it, send me your $25,000 or whatever, right? And we're done. So a lot of early raises are actually really quick with no like post-closing process. If you're going to get like a term sheet though, with like a lead and it's a price round, maybe a little bit later on, then lawyers got to get involved. I mean, like there's going to be all sorts of little terms that you need a lawyer to work through. There might be some additional due diligence too, just like background checks to make sure that Eric isn't like an axe killer, or like just making sure that like we haven't cheated like our clients or anything like that. Like some of those kinds of hygiene things are really important too. So I would anticipate like after you accept a term sheet, it's going to be another 3 to 6 weeks. So plan accordingly. Don't have like 1 month of runway left. That's not a position of power, right? I mean, have at least 6 months, but even better is like, 8 months or 9 months, I'd say. That gives you a little bit more of a relaxed pace. And VCs are very good at sniffing out fear. If it's just like, if like I'm like pitching and like I have 45 days of cash left, no matter how charismatic or whatever I can be, Cheng-Wei is going to smell the desperation somehow. Like she'll figure it out. She's very smart. So yeah, I guess with that, we can leave it at that. And maybe Cheng-Wei, what we can do is just share again a little bit about Singapore Global Network. Just again, like we've been working very closely with Cheng-Wei and team at the Economic Development Board of Singapore, now with Singapore Global Network. It is a very, very special team that is hustling super hard on behalf of founders. Highly recommend that you check it out. And this Tech Pass thing is like freaking incredible, right? Like of all the places I want to live in the world, I think Singapore is very, very high up. If you haven't visited before, it is like looking into the future, like 50 years of like what a city should actually look like. Extremely well run, very, very safe, really, really oriented around innovation and early adoption. So Cheng-Wei, I hope it's okay. I'm flashing up your contact information here one more time. This Tech Pass thing is like, it's so hard to get visas in most places, but it's like almost too good to be true. So definitely check out Tech Pass as well if you're thinking that you want to start to build in Singapore. And there's a really good community out there for you to land and to meet. Is there anything else that you would add to that, Cheng-Wei, in terms of some things here?
No, I think if anyone has any questions on TechPass or people that you're looking to meet to maybe help you with what's going on in Singapore, feel free to message me on email or LinkedIn, and I'll be happy to connect you to someone.
Awesome. All right, Chenwei, thanks so much for allowing us to do this session with you today. It was a lot of fun. You're a great moderator. And to those of you in the audience, really, really appreciate your time. Best of luck to you in your Zoom pitches. Kick some butt.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.